Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thanks for joining our live discussion here today to talk about the state of digital transformation in Europe. So if you're in the European region, this is a conversation you won't want to miss. And in fact, if you're not in Europe, I would still highly suggest you listen to this conversation because I think in many ways the EU is setting the tone for how digital transformations might look in the future now and going forward. So my name is 𝗦𝘂𝗿𝘁. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys today. And joining me today to have the conversation is Stuart Robb, who's our EVP of Third Stage Consulting in Europe. So Stuart, thanks for being here today.
Thanks very much for having me, Eric. Good to see you as always.
Yeah, good to see you. We had a chance to see each other last week in Europe, and we've had some great conversations, not just last week, but over the years of working together, of comparing notes on trends in the industry. And I'm really excited to get into today's conversation. Before I jump in and start asking you questions, though, I want to say hello to our audience that's joining us here live. Thank you for being here. Love to see what city and country you're joining from. So if you don't mind, just drop in the chat, what city and country are you joining from here today? We tend to draw people from not only all over Europe, but from all over the world. So would love to hear your questions and thoughts throughout the conversation today. But to start, just let us know where you're joining from today, and we'll keep an eye on any questions or comments you have for Stuart and I here today. But before we jump into our questions, some of the questions I have for you today, Stuart, tell me a little bit about yourself and your background. You've got quite the illustrious career here in the consulting world and the technical world.
So I've been in IT since 1984, which makes me very old. Started on IBM mainframe and then got involved with Anderson Consulting as it was in about 1997, on an ERP and CRM program, and then worked for them, Ernst & Young as an executive consultant, then on to Capgemini Consulting Australia, head of transformation consulting, and then freelance until I hooked up with you. When was that? About 2019, wasn't it?
So yeah, I think early 2019.
Little bit of a hiatus where I kind of semi-retired for a little while, and now I'm back with a vengeance. So yeah, but a very broad industry skill set, medium size and large FTSE organizations, across finance, supply chain. Mostly the European practice is focused on private equity. So the European practice done a lot of work with the likes of 𝗦𝘂𝗿𝘁 Capital and Astorg and similar organizations. Yeah, that's just where we kind of landed our European business.
Yeah, we've had a lot of good clients we've worked with here in recent years at Third Stage Consulting in Europe. And one reason I really enjoy working with you and just being colleagues with you in general is not only do you have a lot of experience with a lot of different consulting firms and technologies and that sort of thing, but you're also a bit of a skeptic. I would say you're a bit of a skeptic like myself. So it's always fun to compare notes with you or hear your thoughts on some of this stuff.
Far more skeptical than you, Eric.
Because you've got about 10 years on me in terms of your career longevity. So give me a few more years. So I guess to start, I know this is a really broad question, but just, when you started your career in 84 and even getting into, you've been through a lot, Y2K and, the financial meltdown of the late, 2008, 2010 period. So you've seen a lot of ups and downs in the tech industry. You've seen a lot of consulting firms come and go, technology firms come and go. So how would you, if you look back at your career and look at where we are today, how would you just describe the state of the union, so to speak, here in digital transformations, particularly in Europe and in the UK where you're based?
That's a very broad question. I mean, the funny thing is that in my life, the more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Yeah.
So when I started in computing, it was big centralized computers running centralized applications. And then it became everything was going to be distributed, and it was all open systems, client server, this, that, and the other. And then it was ASPs, and now it's back to highly centralized computing platforms, whether mainframes, let's call them that, whether that's the Google mainframe or the SAP mainframe or the Amazon mainframe runs everything, and you're effectively just on a dumb terminal. So in fact, whilst the graphics and the visualization has become a bit better, in respect of the computing itself, we're almost back to where we started. And it was quite interesting. I mean, have things improved for the better? Well, I was talking to a friend of mine about their cyber incident, and in 1984, if you'd had a incident on a mainframe and it went down, and if you didn't have it back up working in 24 hours, you were going to be fired. I mean, that was it. You were sacked. Yeah, right. Because you could recover a mainframe in 24 hours, have all the applications back up and running, and be carrying on. And nowadays, it's months. I mean, we've had Jaguar Land Rover, we've had the Cooperative, we've had various other major companies in the UK all suffer cyber hits, which have taken them out for months. And even Amazon, on whom the UK government has a huge number of services that it supplies to UK citizens, on AWS was out for 2 days and nobody could access anything. So we're seeing this transition to digital ID and digital banking and CBDCs and what have you. And all that's happening is we're putting more and more reliance on technology with less and less ability to manage it properly. And that's kind of controversial. But as I said, there is an assumption that everything that happens is happening for the better. Well, we had Concorde. We were able to land on the moon. We're not able to do either of those two things today. So to say everything is better, I think is actually, this is where the skeptic in me comes in, right?
Yeah, and you have to look at why are people so excited about this new model, not this relatively new, but not so new model, to your point about ASPs coming and going back in the early 2000s, which is basically a predecessor to the cloud managed service model that we have today. Yeah. But people are, in general, the industry is very excited about it. But you have to look at why are they so excited? Is it the concept itself that's so exciting, or is it the fact that is it the profit behind it?
It's cost. I mean, let's call it out what it is, right? It's cheaper to get somebody else to run your computing for you than it is to provide your own net servers and infrastructure and support people and what have you. So offloading that whole problem onto a third party is cheaper, and therefore that's why would they not want to do that? Well, the reason is because as soon as you do that, you lose control of your own destiny. So it was very interesting. There was an article published in I think it was the Times last week. That was the UK government recommending all businesses have business interruption and business continuity plans that are written down on paper. And you would never have had to say that 30 or 40 years ago. That would have just been the default. Everybody would have had the disaster recovery plan and the business continuity plan and the backup tapes ready to go at a moment's notice. And now half of these organizations don't even have backup tapes. They've got such vast swathes of data that the idea of backing them up to tape overnight is ridiculous. So when they get hit with a cyber encryption attack, they're knackered. The data's encrypted. That's it. They pay up or they jog on. And it's extraordinary, in fact, how we think things have got better, and actually in some respects they've got a whole lot worse.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that. I mean, it's for all the benefit of cloud and SaaS-based computing services, there certainly are benefits. Like you mentioned, costs can be lower, but the transition to the cloud for a lot of organizations is super painful, even more painful than a typical upgrade that you would have seen 10 or 20 years ago, because now you've got a bit less flexibility. You're not going to be able to customize that solution the way you could have in the past necessarily. So there's a lot of pain and hidden costs that goes along with it that a lot of people overlook or gloss over.
There's a couple of aspects to that. The first is what drives business benefit, right? So if we're talking about an ERP, an accounting system, I mean, accounting systems basically haven't changed since 1970. In fact, I was talking to someone a while ago. When I started, the very first accounting system I ever used was a mainframe accounting system, which was based on a system developed by Martin Marietta Systems. The system doesn't exist, but it was a set of COBOL programs that added up and took away. And in fact, even the very early version of SAP did broadly the same thing. It was lots of mainframe files that added up and took away. And if you come to 2025, an accounting system is basically still a system that adds up and takes away. It's just got lots of fancy user interface over the top of it, but you're not going to get a lot of business benefit from doing good adding up and taking away. You can get some automation benefits, but that's about it. So I think companies that try to look for ERP in itself for business benefit are going to struggle. Where they get the business benefit is around some of the peripheral activities, such as improving their supply chain or their demand planning models or things like that, which are things that humans tend to do quite badly. The modeling tools out there now can do a lot better. But is it transformational? Well, I'm not sure. I mean, we did work for a client a few years ago in Europe about route planning and working out whether it was better to have lots more small distribution hubs across Europe or whether it was better to have central larger distribution hubs in 2 or 3 countries. And the software that did that was amazing, and it was extraordinary, and it came up with an answer that no amount of processing by 20 human beings could ever have come up with.
Right.
And so you look at AI, can AI do it better? Well, maybe a bit better, but it was pretty good then, right? So you struggled to do a lot better than you did five or so years ago.
Yeah. That's, good point. I have a follow-up question. So hold that thought. I'm going to ask you a follow-up to that, but I want to turn to the audience real quick because we're getting some comments coming in here. Darian on LinkedIn says, good morning. Good morning, Darian. Abdul on YouTube says, hi, Eric. I was reading your digital transformation book. Welcome to the jungle. Really good insights shared. So thank you for that. That book just came out a few weeks ago. You can get that on Amazon. If you go to Amazon, you can get electronically, paperback, and hardcover anywhere in the world, including throughout Europe. So if wherever you live, you can get a hard copy or electronic copy. So thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the book there. Bearwave on YouTube says, great insight. Thank you for that. Yuri on LinkedIn says, everything that happens for the better. Just question better for who? And
Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
And the global elites and the WEF and all of those people.
Yeah, that's the thing is whenever you and I talk, we always run the risk of getting into politics, which we have which we have many times. But without getting into politics, it does raise the question of, are we comfortable as a business and society having that much concentrated power, if you will? It really is about power and control of data. And I don't necessarily mean in a dystopian George Orwellian sort of way. I just mean, you're ceding control of your applications, your data, your workflows, your operations. In many ways, you're ceding control to these big tech companies. And you have to ask yourself, is that a good thing long term? Or are we going to see a whiplash where things come back and the pendulum settles somewhere in a more balanced way? I don't know.
I don't know. Power has always been consolidated in the center, right? You look at JP Morgan, that he didn't come from nowhere, neither did Rothschild. And so, you always find in every era there's a concentration of power, even if you go back to like 1050 when William the Conqueror was plotting his invasion of England. There was a concentration of power. So I don't think just because we're 2,000 years further on, we're necessarily that much more insightful. And I think the same is true of any modern tech. You're always going to get somebody who's able to exploit that and build a business out of it, and that business will become dominant for a while. But we're going to talk about SAP later. You take IBM as an example. In 1983, you couldn't buy a computer that wasn't IBM for the most part. There were a couple of OEM manufacturers. There was Digital and one or two other, what we call sort of tier twos. But nobody could conceive of anything other than buying IBM. And there was a great conversation we had last week about, you never got sacked for buying IBM until all of a sudden you did, because IBM was ridiculously overpriced and could be done with other technologies. And then all of a sudden IBM are no longer the dominant player. And so that will continue to happen. Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and, Larry Page and Larry Ellison, and all the rest of them will fall by the wayside eventually. It may take 50 years, it may take 100, but things will change.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'll be curious to see. I feel like we're at that inflection point again now, just with AI, some of these niche competitors that are popping up. Now it's easier than ever to start a tech company. I mean, think how easy, like a non-technologist now could suddenly think, wait, I don't need to know how to code to start a tech company. I could use AI. Obviously you can hire or offshore it. So the barriers to entry are a lot lower now. And I think the more some of the big companies some of the big tech companies push into this one size fits all space, I think the more we'll see, the more likely we are to see a major shift in the market with someone finding an alternative solution to that.
It's really interesting. I mean, I've got a couple of young daughters and I'm teaching them mainframe COBOL, partly because that's a proper computing language, not like the nonsense we get there today, but also because actually that's dying out. And nobody's investing in tools for COBOL, or at least not significantly. IBM have made a couple of efforts, and it's absolutely awful. But no bank or airline or insurance company are going to invest billions in redeveloping their IBM mainframe systems because they work and they're incredibly secure. I mean, when was the last time you heard of an airline or a bank being hacked successfully? The answer is almost never, because mainframes are really, really, really robust and hard to get into. It's all the peripheral systems like the online portals and the access systems that fall over and don't happen. So I still use mainframe. I create all of the company invoices, our company invoices, on an IBM mainframe emulation because I just love it.
Yeah.
But as I said, it goes back to this idea that technology somehow is good because it's new technology. And we'll talk about AI in a while, but I'm not buying it. I mean, it's if you look at, I mean, it's a bubble. There is no question, because when you look at NVIDIA are investing in Oracle, and Oracle are investing in somebody else, and then somebody else are investing in NVIDIA, that is all circular money to push up, to inflate the share price. That has got nothing to do with creating a leading edge technology platform. This is all about shareholder equity.
Right.
And you can't have a company that's got 42 times earnings share price when its actual earnings are 3 times
Yeah.
So there is a big reset coming, and I think all of this will get a strong, hard reevaluation as to what the fundamentals are around technology and around computing, and then we will see where the direction of travel is. But I think we are at this, it's like the 2000 .com bubble, right? We're at that same inflection point, and I think we're in for a reset, and whether that's a small reset, or a like 2001, or a big reset like 2008, we'll see. But we're long overdue.
Yeah, I agree. Well said. Here's a question or a comment from Abdul on YouTube. Says, I'm currently working as a business analyst, part of a digital transformation program for supply chain. Simply loving your insights shared by Third Stage Consulting. I would love to be part of your team. So thank you for the kind words there. We'd love to chat with you about how that might happen. So reach out to us. Carmen on LinkedIn says you are 100% correct. So
about almost every subject.
I was going to say, I think that's a blanket statement. Everything you've said so far is 100% correct.
There we go. Happy with that.
Andy on LinkedIn, thanks for joining today, Andy. Andy says people expect magic to happen when moving to a new ERP or cloud ERP. Yes, however, they don't transform the processes. A bad process move to cloud is still broken, just faster. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And funny enough, one of the topics that we kind of talked about before was, people are expecting the technology to be probably better than it is now. So I'm dealing with a client at the moment that's implementing Microsoft Dynamics 365 F&O. And part of that solution is the expenses solution. And when the business saw the expenses solution of Dynamics 365 F&O, they couldn't believe how rubbish it was. And it, compared to some of these newer startups, it is genuinely awful. but then we had a conversation, and it was really interesting. How good do you want an expenses solution to be? Because how much do you really want people putting expenses in? If you make it a bit tricky and a bit horrible, then they're less likely to put expenses in. And that was a genuine conversation in a customer. But there's now an expectation that technology is well ahead of its capability, and that's even true of chatbots and the AI side of large language models, is that people expect it to be a lot cleverer than it is, and actually it's about as clever as a small child. It really is not very good at all. And then everybody gets very disappointed when you spend 20 minutes talking to a chatbot and it doesn't answer your question, and then doesn't even offer you the opportunity to go and speak to someone that can solve your problem. And so that's why I think AI, one of the many reasons that I think AI is hype and it's a bubble.
Yeah. I have a comment here I'm going to get to in a moment about that I want to get your reaction to. But first, Paul on LinkedIn says adding up and taking away hasn't changed. Great point. We just pay more for the same benefit and features we don't necessarily need in ERP systems.
Well, and more interestingly, we don't want to pay more for it, which is why SAP are in such a lot of trouble at the moment, because they want people to be on their spangly new, very expensive HANA system. And anyone who's got £1 billion worth of investment in ECC6 doesn't want to spend any money with SAP migrating, because what do they get for it? They get Fiori apps and they get the promise of AI that doesn't actually do anything for them. And they go, no, thanks. We'll stay with what we are. And that's why SAP kept kicking the support date down the road. Since 2017, I think they've kicked it down the road at least 4 times. And now that they've put a hard end date, that's creating its own reaction in the marketplace, which is not going down very well. So, it's a point well made. The risk and the cost of changing has to be outweighed by very, very, very clear benefits. And if there aren't very, very clear benefits, customers are going to resist. And the larger and more complex the customer, the more likely they are to resist, which is why all of the really, really big UK and European firms are just not moving.
Yeah, it's less than half, I believe, worldwide, and I presume it's similar in the EU and UK as well.
Yeah, I mean, usually the reason for transferring up is because there's some critical business event, like a divestment or something like that, that's creating a business change off the back of which the company has no choice. But if it's a static choice of, we're on ECC6 for our pharma business and SAP want us to move to HANA, the answer is no. And that's right across the board, particularly in the larger organizations that have much more clout. And we have this antitrust thing now about SAP maintenance. And because SAP have now made it a properly hard deadline, the rumor has it that the very, very big firms have been lobbying the EU to take out an antitrust action against SAP as a lever to get SAP to push the support date for ECC6 out indefinitely. And they're saying by this antitrust, well, if you won't support it indefinitely, then we need organizations who will. Now, that's a real danger for SAP, because their maintenance revenue keeps their ongoing operations going, but they're just not getting the revenue that they need from new footprints or enhancements and upgrades to HANA. So SAP are in this really difficult position. And when we talked a little bit earlier about that problem that IBM had, that they were so big and monolithic and slow that they just couldn't keep up with the migration away from mainframes, well, SAP, I think, are heading very much towards the same position. And therefore, their business model is highly imperiled at the moment. And it will be fascinating to see what happens, because you've got all these very large corporations paying very large sums of money in annual support to SAP, but SAP are stuck in this rut of not being able to grow their revenue base through new clients.
Yeah.
And there was another company for whom that applied, which was Computer Associates, CA. They used to be the second largest software company in the world, but once the mainframes disappeared, they fell by the wayside. Similarly with Micro Focus, although for slightly different reasons. So these large software firms do disappear. They get subsumed and absorbed, and the rump of which, continues to support clients. As I said, I think SAP will continue in its current guise almost indefinitely, but whether or not it will be, with everybody happy on their new SAP S6 HANA platform or S7 HANA platform, I'm quite skeptical.
Yeah, I am too. And we just see too many pissed off clients throughout Europe and other parts of the world, that customers of SAP, people that are saying, we don't want to do it. And the ones that are doing it, a lot of them are saying we're doing it because we have to. And, of course, the question we ask is, but do you? Why? Why do you think you have to? Of course, SAP is going to try and convince you have to, but that's not necessarily true.
Well, the other problem as well is that SAP's terms for HANA, their general terms and conditions for cloud services, section 9.1.1-B, is massively more egregious than terms that clients will already be on. So that particular section in UK law says that a company has unlimited liability for license true-ups. And SAP, again, partly in order to prop up their revenues, have been extraordinarily aggressive with their licensing true-ups, to the extent that Diageo, the drinks company, got fined £57 million through litigation by SAP for licensing where they gave access to SAP data via Salesforce. And they bought an integration license, and SAP argued successfully in court that every end user should have a license to access that data. And that cost Diageo millions. And so you can see the behavior that SAP is doing to shore up its business, but also by tightening and making more egregious its licensing terms, it's actually turning customers away. I had a customer very recently who were on the verge of getting SAP because it was an easier migration, looking at the license terms going, actually, do you know what? No, we're going to go a different way because we cannot sign our business up to something that is a material risk that we would have to report in the annual accounts. And because they were a private equity based firm, they just said, no, can't do it. And so SAP effectively excluded themselves just from their own terms and conditions. So that's really interesting. I mean, there's a real market dynamic that sits behind that says, if you are in that much of a dominant position, you are the easiest to fall because you are the one sitting highest up the pyramid, right?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I want to come back to this EU investigation, I guess you'd call it, into potential antitrust behavior by SAP, because this is a really big deal. And we actually covered this in our last week's podcast.
Yeah.
You can find that episode 244 of Transformation Ground Control. Just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you don't already subscribe, you can get all the past episodes. You'll see episode 244 has the episode where we talk to an attorney and to a third-party maintenance provider of SAP. And we talk about this whole EU thing in a lot of detail last episode. But I think, getting back to the topic at hand here today, I think one of the reasons why, not only because we have an office and a presence and clients and a team in Europe, that's part of why we wanted to have this conversation today, but also because I think in a lot of ways, EU sets the tone for how regulations are going to look worldwide, for better or for worse. Whether you like it or not is a whole other story, but EU does seem to be ahead of the curve in terms of setting the framework that a lot of other governments and regulatory bodies throughout the world will end up following. Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying other governments are now going to sue SAP for antitrust behavior, but I think my personal opinion is
I would be surprised if the US states didn't start, because this is a bigger problem for a manufacturer who uses SAP in the US as it is for a European company. And you're right to say that what Europe tends to do first, like GDPR and the whole private personal identifiable information legislation, you now see that in Canada and Florida and New York, and it's starting to become more pervasive across the US. So I am expecting that to happen. I think though on the SAP side, what we're also seeing is a change in customer behaviours. These large customers are just not willing to get knocked about by SAP. They're not willing to be bullied, and so they are putting their foot down. And they're just not playing SAP's game, and that's a real problem for SAP. And the problem is that when you get into a dominant position, you get into a dominant position mindset, which, as I said, was the mindset IBM were in the early 90s. And the executives, it becomes a bad marriage. It's incredibly difficult to shift that mindset to be more agile and to be more customer centric and yada yada yada, which is never really been SAP's strong point, but absolutely is not SAP's strong point recently in the last 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting a lot of really good comments and questions in the chat here, so I'm going to just keep pulling up some of the comments here. Andy on LinkedIn says, if they go after SAP in an antitrust suit, then they'll have to go after Oracle as well, and that is an impossible battle for the EU to win. Larry Ellison has rather deep pockets. I don't know.
Putin is far richer than Ellison and Elon Musk put together, according to Elon Musk. So I think the EU's got a few quid if it wants. I don't think this is a question of pockets. I think this is a question of regulation. But the truth is that the difference between SAP and Oracle is that Oracle are not crowding out their customer base and pushing them and punching them to do something they don't want to do.
I agree. I was just going to say
as soon as Oracle start that behavior, then you'll see an equivalent backlash. I'm quite certain.
Yeah, I think you'd be more likely to see it with like Microsoft, maybe partly because the EU's already had successful cases against Microsoft in the past for consumer-facing technology, and that's the thing we talked about last week. By the way, is if we were in a consumer-facing space, this ERP space that we're in right now, the digital transformation space, this would have been regulated long ago. But we're still in the wild, wild west. Tech companies can do whatever they want, and they can get away with it. But now all of a sudden the EU saying, well, maybe not. Maybe you're not going to get away with it. And I actually think it's a good thing because I think it'll force not just SAP, but other big tech providers to look at what they're doing. And see.
I mean, I looked up in Europe recently how many big cases there have been against Microsoft for things like true-ups and, breach of license terms. And do you know how many I found?
How many?
None.
Yeah.
So there's a real psychological difference. But now I think Microsoft realize they're missing a trick because they are starting to do true-ups now. But Microsoft are a far easier company to deal with in that respect. I mean, I have a little saying that SAP terms and conditions are unreasonable and Microsoft's are unfathomable and Oracle's are both. And out of all of the three legal departments that I deal with, by far and away the worst to deal with is Oracle, actually. But Microsoft generally are just happy to get the money, right? And the number of court cases there are against Microsoft or Microsoft against clients is vanishingly small compared to the number against SAP and then to a lesser extent Oracle. So again, there's a different psychology about how those organizations go about their business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think SAP is sort of taking it to the extreme, and others are starting to follow some of their plays and their playbooks. But I think SAP, and it's also the big behemoth. They're the easiest one to pick on if you're a regulator because they're so big, and so I can see why SAP is the target here.
Well, and SAP's in Europe, right? It's headquartered in Germany. So if you're in Europe, that's an easy target because they're right in your back pocket jurisdiction, aren't they?
Yeah, but it's also, isn't it the EU's most highly valued company or definitely tech company? I don't know if it's the
most highly valued tech company. Yeah, no, it's a long way from being the most highly valued EU company.
Yeah.
That's Third Stage Consulting Europe's most highly.
I know. I just didn't want to brag about it. So here's an interesting, speaking of Oracle, and I apologize, I don't see who put this, but this is on LinkedIn. It says, interestingly, workflow systems layered on top of ERP systems to automate the tedious work are popular in the UK. There are more Oracle Apex developers in the UK and Europe than in the US, I would venture to say.
Yeah.
You've seen
yes, no, absolutely. And that, funny enough, we have clients, in fact, we were talking to a potential client last week, a lot of the Oracle Fusion, or whatever they call their product suite today, the actual manufacturing side of Oracle Fusion really has quite a poor success rate. And so we do see a lot of layered, and the people going, okay, we give up on fusion directly for manufacturing, and we'll layer other applications on the top to do the MRP side of things, and we'll just do ERP for Oracle. And in fact, one of my people, Dominic, he's in a client at the moment unwinding an Oracle Fusion project that's gone wrong and putting in a MRP on the top of Oracle to solve that exact problem. So yes, that's definitely a truism.
Yeah. And here's a follow-up comment. I think it's from the same person because I don't see the name, and you might appreciate this British history, Stuart, but the current head of Oracle Apex, which is Oracle's AI vibe coding platform, is Simon Hunt. He was formerly at the British Army for 20 plus years doing Apex apps. He won a medal for it, I believe the Victoria Cross, for how much he saved them, avoiding the rip and replace approach other vendors were pushing. So
I don't think we give Victoria Crosses for extreme bravery in the front of Oracle, but if we do, I'm fascinated.
I don't know, what is the Victoria Cross model for those of us that are not?
The Victoria Cross is something we give for extreme bravery and things like World War One, when you go over the top and try and run straight towards the enemy without being fearful.
Yeah, he might have. I mean,
he might have got a medal for conspicuous bravery, I'm sure, but I'm not certain it was for going in front of Oracle and using their Apex apps. I think
unless his life was at risk, which I wouldn't be surprised if someone's life was at risk for. Because sometimes I wonder, like, is SAP going to send out some henchmen after me or something? Because I always talk about how SAP does things I don't like, but
yeah, well, yeah.
So I've got to poke the bear a little bit here, Stuart, because the good thing about knowing you so well for so long is I know what some of your triggers are, and I'm going to trigger you here. And this is not it. Oh shoot, there's so many really good questions that now I lost it. Oh, here it is. So this is from another LinkedIn person that I don't see the name. It says, have companies in the UK and Europe genuinely integrated AI into their ERP systems, or is it still more experimental?
No.
I mean, surely AI is going to solve all this, right? I mean,
no. So I follow AI very closely, and I have been doing for a number of years. And it's quite interesting. There's a very, very good YouTube scientist, Sabine. Her name begins with H. I can't remember the name. When I find it, I'll put it up. But she takes all the latest scientific and tech announcements, and she really drills into them and really pulls them apart from a very, 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 very technical perspective. So she gets right into the weeds on quantum computing and whether it really works, and starts talking about Schrodinger's cat and stuff like that. Very interesting. But one of the interesting ones that she came up with recently is that some research has recently been published that says AI LLMs can never be genuinely intelligent because they can never be beyond language models, and where the way that human brains reason is not purely based on language. It's based on a whole variety of other inputs and processes, and we see this in chatbots. Okay, and let's just say AI for what it is, right? We had big data, and big data promised everything. Okay, that was going to solve our world. And then when that kind of ran out of steam, we needed something else to sell. So then we leapt in and we went, I know, let's sell AI. And we did that before. We did that with CRM, and we did it before with open systems, and we did it before with distributed computing. And we've done it over and over and over again. So let's just call it out for what it is. This is the big tech firms churning the base to take some more money out of the private equity market. That's what's going on here, right? And so PE people will become very rich, and one or two of these tech companies like NVIDIA will become very, very rich. And then in 20 years' time, they'll have disappeared, or 30 years' time, they'll have disappeared. We'll never hear from them again. So that's my rant over. So answering the question now, there are some very, very interesting things that AI can do in the consumer space. So if I want to see Captain Picard on Star Trek dressed in a communist commissar's uniform and being in charge of the USSR Enterprise, and it's a video and it looks amazing, then that AI is brilliant at that. Now, what use that is, I'm not quite sure, but in terms of developing deepfakes and all of that, it's amazing. When you get to chatbots, it's absolutely useless, because as soon as you need to do anything complicated, like change your phone number on Amazon, or today I was trying to get my no claims bonus out of an insurance company for my car, complete failure, absolutely, totally, utterly useless. Whenever I see the word virtual assistant, my heart sinks, because I know I'm going to waste 20 minutes of my life before I get to speak to someone that can actually do what I want in 5 seconds. Why? Because large language models do not reason. They merely take language and predict what the next thing is going to be said. So if I say, I'd like to order, and you have to predict the next words, if I'm in a restaurant, it could be, I'd like to order food, or I'd like to order drinks, or I'd like to order fish, or I'd like to order you outside and go away, please.
Yeah.
And it's all a ranking. It's more likely if you're in a fish restaurant that you'd say, I want to order fish, than it is you'd say, I'd like to order you to go outside. Okay. But that's all it's doing. It's predicting language. It's not actually reasoning. It's not actually understanding that, fish is only on Friday. It doesn't have that contextual understanding. And that's why quite a lot of AI, when you ask it a question, whether it's Copilot or Gawk or all these other ones, get the answer wrong. Not because they've got the answer wrong, it's because they've learned the answer from the internet that has, according to Jeremy Clarkson, 11 billion facts, of which 20 billion are all wrong, and that's where it's got its information from. So, of course, it's going to be wrong. And we see this over and over again. There was a case of a guy who asked for a medical treatment for something, and the AI told him it was sodium carbonate, not sodium chloride, or something like that, because that was what its model had learned. The fact that whatever this was, it wasn't sodium carbonate, but it was something similar, was toxic, was the AI had no idea. But as a result, the guy was properly hospitalized. That was in last week. That was 2 weeks, actually 2 weeks ago. There's a classic case of the AI that made up or hallucinated, which is another word for telling rubbish, a load of court cases, and quoting them in a court case that went to a judge in the US, and the law firm got slated for it because none of this case law existed. And part of the reason for that is that AI has no ability to say, I don't know. And whenever you ask a question, it never says, I don't know. And because it can never say, I don't know, it can only ever be wrong. Because if it's right, it doesn't know. But if it's wrong, it doesn't know either. So
it's a good point.
It's like asking a particularly ignorant child to explain what Schrodinger's cat is, right? It could read it off a book, but it would have no concept of what being dead and alive at the same time is. In fact, even I struggle with that. And I read A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking, and I thought that was hard going. But there's no conceptual understanding. So AI can never do what people think it can do. And the realization is slowly coming. Now, can it do really interesting stuff in ERP? Yes, it can. I mean, I was at Deloitte a couple of days ago, and we were talking about some of the stuff where AI has use cases in ERP, and where that's been really successful. And it's in revenue modeling, it's in accounts receivable. It's obviously AI in accounts payable has been around for ages, because we've had scanning invoices, we've had three-way matching, and that is a conceptual AI, but without the large language model. So it really depends on what your definition of AI is. But have we got to the stage in ERP yet where we can have the equivalent of Captain Picard in a communist uniform commanding the USSR Enterprise? I think we're a long way away. And I think the problem actually is having the idea about what is good. And I think it's probably more likely that in demand forecasting and anything that requires data analysis and hypotheses based on data analysis is going to be a better use case than, trying to change your Amazon phone number, because, as I said, the chatbots that do that at the moment are still worse than useless.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. All those are great points. And I think one of the problems we see is that cloud ERP and AI are delivering a sort of 1-2 punch to the market in terms of, if I'm an organization that wants to leverage AI, I'm being told by the industry that in order to get all this magic of AI, even though it's not magical to your point, but I'm being sold this bill of goods of AI being a magical tool that'll solve all my problems. And by the way, the only way you can get AI is if you move all your applications to our newest cloud solution, like S/4HANA or D365
and
or whatever.
There's a great scene in The Wolf of Wall Street where Leonardo DiCaprio is in the restaurant with Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew McConaughey is going, it's a fugazi. It's a way of taking money out of the client's pocket and putting it in your pocket. It doesn't exist. And that's what AI is at the moment. It's a way of getting money out of private equity and money out of clients for stuff that doesn't exist, or at least doesn't provide significant amounts of business value. So if you're going to do anything with AI, be really, really, really clear how, you start with a business problem that AI really clearly solves for this amount of money. And if you've got that value chain really well defined, well, then maybe it's worth a punt. But at the moment, I wouldn't invest 20 quid in it. I just think it's valueless.
Yeah, definitely not long term. Plus, you don't know how many, to your point earlier, you don't know how many of these AI providers are going to be around in 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Yeah, and the ones that are good will emerge.
Yeah.
It's like, is it likely that I will be the next Amazon because I bet on an AI firm at the moment? Well, possibly, but I haven't seen any examples of anything where investing in that technology is the next big thing. It's all a bit promising and it's all a bit interesting, but it's not knocking my socks off in terms of revolution. I mean, even when Amazon started, nobody could ever have predicted that a small bookseller with a rather nifty app would turn out to run virtually half the world's, infrastructure applications and digital ID and all the rest of it. I mean, that's just like was completely not predicted. So,
Yeah, good. Very true. Speaking of the future and predictions, what do you see as the future for tier 1 consulting firms?
I'm a lot less skeptical than most. There's a few things happening at the moment, right? AI is not replacing tier 1 consulting firms. That is absolute rubbish. No matter what certain people who want to drum up that particular narrative are aiming for. That's not what I deal with. The tier 1s a lot. I was Deloitte a few days ago. I was with Accenture last week, and there is a definite slowdown in consulting firms recruiting out of universities, and that's got nothing to do with AI producing brilliant test strategies. It's complete noise. It's because consulting is going through its usual cycle of boom and bust, and it's going through a slow growth cycle, and so it's not recruiting, and it's also laying a lot of people off. It's done that 20 times before. It'll do it 20 times again. The other thing is that there are two classes of people in tier 1 firms. I mean, not in firms like ours, but in tier 1 firms, you have the careerists and then you have the exceptionals. And the careerists are people who are on the bench. They get put into a client and they do effectively the job that the client could do if the client had the money, the capacity and resources. And they tend to be a bit better than average. So if you get a, quote, functional consultant from Deloitte or from Accenture or from KPMG, they will be 20% better than if you got one off the contractor market, but that's about it, right? But they will move between tier one firms, or most probably they will move into the client at some point, or even out of the industry. Then there are the exceptionals, and the exceptionals are the ones who fast track their way through the tier ones and get to be director or partner, associate partner really quickly. And that's because they're exceptional. And those are the people you want on your engagement. You don't want the fodder and the bench. You want the exceptionals, because the exceptionals add value, and they are not going to be replaced by AI, because they have experience, they have people skills, they have ability to communicate, they have a whole raft of attributes and knowledge that is not going to get replaced by AI. And they are able to bring a concept to a client and say, this is what we think, this is our point of view, this is what we think you should do, and it will land. And McKinsey's been doing that, and Boston Consulting and Deloitte and Accenture and KPMG have been, and PwC, all of those have that tier of people, and they do it very well. And those people are not going anywhere. They might have less people underneath them, but that's because, you know, that they can subcontract some of that, that what I call the fodder, the you know, the careerists. But the requirement for strong, knowledgeable advice is going to be there forever. So in fact, in many respects, I see tier one firms becoming more like third stage, which is, you know, we have exceptional people, but we only have exceptional people. We don't have careerists, because our value is in giving that really, really, really high quality advice and guidance and getting it right first time. And AI doesn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Andy on LinkedIn has a question or a comment that I'm curious to know if it pertains to the EU or to Europe and UK as well. But Andy says tier one firms are now realizing they don't have the skills they need. So they're on a major acquisition drive. For example, Accenture bought a litany of Oracle Fusion tier 2 SIs here in the US. Is that something you're seeing in Europe as well?
No, but not quite for that reason. I mean, Europe's economic cycle is not great at the moment. There's the Ukraine situation has been quite a drag on Europe. So there's quite a significant amount of economic uncertainty. In the UK, certainly also we have significantly higher taxes, and that's reducing investment. So, there's even been a couple of new consulting firms that call themselves tier one start up, and they've rapidly disappeared without a trace. So what we think we're seeing more in the UK, certainly, and in Europe, is a consolidation. And although they're getting rid of some of the lower tiers, they're not buying firms. A lot of them are continuing to reinforce their Indian offshore operations, Philippines, and India. But I haven't certainly seen significant activity from any of the partners buying out tier two firms. It's just not a model that I think is currently in vogue in the UK at the moment,
right?
Or in Europe.
Yeah. What about the trend that we're starting to see it in some parts of the world, but I'm curious, in Europe and UK, are you seeing a trend away from the monolithic ERP model towards the more composable ERP model, or what are you seeing there, if anything?
I mean, look, there's Workday for HR, there's SAP Oracle for core ERP. Then when you get into the sort of the slightly smaller sub-billion, you get Microsoft F&O, you get NetSuite, and then you go down again to Business Central, and those are still pretty much bread and butter. I mean, you get the occasional, left wingers who go for Odoo, and some of the more, the left field.
So not left wingers like politically left. You're
no,
saying.
I don't. People who are just like not more out of the mainstream.
Yeah.
but no, I mean the top 10 are still a top 10, right? In for 𝗦𝘂𝗿𝘁, again, very heavily used in MRP. If you don't want SAP, 𝗦𝘂𝗿𝘁 is a really, really good alternative. So is Plex. So I would say still 90% of all the clients we deal with still don't deal, probably even outside the top 5, let alone the top 10. I mean, now every PE firm you walk into will be going, what are we going? Business Central or NetSuite? I mean, are we doing Workday or are we doing one of the, HiBob? So again, there's a conservatism in Europe, particularly because I think Europe recognizes there's no real substantial benefit in going out on a limb unless you've got some real odd use case that gives you a real big business benefit. And because I think our boards tend to be more conservative, they tend to take less risk, and therefore they'll go with the sheep unless there's a really, 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 really good reason to go and lead the pack.
Right. Yeah, to be on that bleeding edge or to test on a lesser proven model or whatever the case may be.
Or take one of the ones that not everybody's heard of. I mean, the other thing as well is, if you take one of the ones that nobody's heard of, not only has nobody heard of it, but it's really hard to recruit for it as well, whether either it's implementation or in actually operating it. If you need an AP consultant in 𝗦𝘁𝘂𝗿𝘁, which is a Finnish ERP, well, you can go to Finland, and then that's about it. That's about the only country that knows how to use it. So you're stuck.
Yeah. I had not heard of that system. So that.
Well, there's over 1,000 ERPs. I mean, if you actually count them up, there's thousands of them. But you've only heard of 10.
Right. There's a reason for that in many cases.
There's a reason for that. Of course there is. Yeah. I mean, I actually met somebody a few years ago who wanted me to invest in his ERP. And it was a ERP specializing in hat makers.
Wow.
Now,
how many of those are there in the world?
Well, in the particular area of the woods that he came from, I can't remember what it was now. It might have been Nottingham, but there were it was the center of hat making in Britain, like from 1800 until whatever. And he'd written this ERP especially for hats, and thought it was a great thing to go and sell. And I'm like, yeah, but who am I selling it to outside of this tiny area of Britain? I mean, it doesn't even support multi-language, so I can't even sell it to France. So it's there are lots and lots of ERPs, but as I go back to what I said earlier, most of an ERP system is adding up and taking away.
Right. So last question I have for you, just to put a bow on this conversation. I appreciate you being here today and sharing the geographic nuances and the cultural nuances of what you're seeing in digital transformations in the region there. But what if you had to give one piece of advice to European business leaders that are embarking on a digital transformation in 2025 into 2026? What's the simple advice you'd leave them with? Not simple to execute, but the summary of what you would advise them to do.
Controversially, I'd say wait.
Yeah.
If there's no compelling reason to move at the moment, there's a huge amount of volatility in the technology. There's a huge amount of economic volatility. And whilst I'd love to take your money and have your business, if I was in your chair, I would probably just sit on it for 6 months or so and see where everything's going.
Yeah.
Because if we have a collapse in the economy like we had in 2008, or if SAP go out of business or whatever the wild thing that happens is, I'd much rather be prepared for that and have not done anything precipitative. I didn't say that right, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Rather than embark on something now and then realize in 6 months' time that I've just finished the company that I'm running because I've invested in something that's going nowhere.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think if you talk to an industry analyst or a lot of the different technologists in the space, they'll tell you that's just, you're going to get left behind. You're going to build up your technical debt. You're going to, they'll use all these buzzwords to make you feel inferior.
Yeah, and yet you look at GlaxoSmithKline and they're running on SAP. They think parts of GlaxoSmithKline are running an ECC5 and they're still running very happily. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how much people love some of these legacy systems, like ECC in particular. I think that's, in some ways, these tech companies, their success has led to problems they're having now. In that, ECC is a pretty good system. I mean, I think
It's
a
a
lot of
very good system. I mean, why change it? What possible reason have I got for changing it when everyone that works in my company knows how to use it? It works faultlessly, or as close to faultlessly as required, and I'm not changing my business significantly enough to warrant the change.
yeah.
Especially not if I'm a multinational pharma company. Why would I take the risk?
Well, especially if you've customized the software,
Um,
you've built up all this IP. But really,
yeah,
that's your intellectual property. You've built it in the
yeah,
system, and now the tech companies are trying to get you to
yeah,
throw that out the window and
yeah.
say, "Forget that. We've got best practices. We know better than you how your business should run." I think that's one of the big
Yeah,
challenges.
well, I'm not buying, and I don't think that's why many of the CEOs are not buying either. And I think that's why we've got an EU antitrust thing going on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And I think if you do wait, waiting doesn't necessarily mean do nothing. I mean, there's so much
Yeah,
you can do with your current environment. You could look at how you could optimize and get more value out of it. You could stabilize it. You could,
process improvement, cost
yeah,
optimization, revenue enhancement. Go back to basics. Stop looking at the tech. Look at your business.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's too easy to get lost in the technology the way things are going right now. But well, I want to thank you for being here today, Stuart. Great
Great to be
conversation
here.
as always, and thank you to the audience for the great questions. You'll see this interview polished up and edited. We'll have additional content to it. It'll become part of an official Transformation Ground Control podcast episode that gets released next week. So be sure to stick around or keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, if you go to transformationgroundcontrol.com, you can see all the past episodes of the show that you may have missed. And just as importantly, if not more importantly, if you're in Europe or anywhere else in the world, but particularly if you're in Europe and you'd like to learn more about how Third Stage Consulting can help with your digital strategy and the execution of those strategies, feel free to reach out to either Stuart or I, and we're happy to help discuss how our team on the ground in Europe might be able to help. So feel free to reach out. We have offices throughout the world. We're obviously based in the U.S., office in EMEA. We also have office in Asia Pacific as well. So wherever in the world you are, feel free to reach out. We're happy to help. So hope you have a great day, great week, and we look forward to seeing you next week, same time, same place. And have a great week in the meantime. Take care.